Hello there. Welcome to my weekly meditation. I am Reverend Devon, and if you are looking to nurture a progressive faith and are open to a second opinion, please know that no matter who you are or where you are in your life journey, you are welcome in this place. And so please also feel free to like and subscribe and share these messages with anybody you feel called to. Reading this week comes from Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. On that day, when evening had come, Jesus said to the disciples, "Let us go across to the other side of the Sea of Galilee." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, Jesus, asleep on the cushion. And the disciples woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Jesus woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. Jesus said to the disciples, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Hello, sisters and brothers. Welcome to our weekly meditation here at the Ascension Lutheran Church. This week we have the reading from the Gospel of Mark. So this is Mark's take on Jesus crossing the Sea of Galilee, getting hit by that storm, and performing the miracle of stilling the waters. And as with many of the accounts of Jesus' miracles, there are two ways in which we can read these passages. We can read them as history, which some people choose to do, or we can read them as parable. Personally, I feel that these stories have more use to us in the world today when we see them as parable. I think that there is always a moral message behind the miracles that Jesus performs within the gospel. And I think that the moral message here that Jesus is relaying to his disciples is about faith and the value of faith in our lives. Because every now and then we do find ourselves looking into the storm of our living and we don't know how we're going to get through. Jesus tells us that having a plan about how we're going to address every single challenge in front of us often is not needed in order for us to live into the will of God. Sometimes the most important thing that we can do as people of faith is to put our faith in God and to jump into tough waters and see how things turn out. And so this is a passage that is pretty self-explanatory. Jesus goes with his disciples into a boat, and together with others, he and his disciples are traveling across the Sea of Galilee. They get hit by a storm. And what we see here is a parallel between Jesus, who is super calm about the entire thing, and his disciples who are freaking out. And Jesus performing a miracle and calming the storm, sort of making it just disappear, it kind of feels like it is literally brushing aside the challenge that is in front of them. But I do think that the message that we have here is that when we put our faith in God, sometimes we are able to overcome things that seem insurmountable. This last week was Juneteenth, for instance. Juneteenth remembers the slaves in Texas who were freed after the Civil War had already been won by the North. It took time for the North to work its way through the South and make it so every state within the former Confederacy adhered to the abolition of slavery. And that took a lot of work, not just from abolitionists and their supporters, but from people who had escaped slavery, people who were in bondage, as well as people within the religious community in the North and in the South, who felt that they had a moral obligation to see slavery abolished within our country. Juneteenth recognizes the culmination of a struggle of faith that we had within our country, a struggle to live into a greater love and a greater inclusion of others. And that was not the end of the story of racial injustice within our country, but it was a milestone when slavery was officially over in America. That was an important milestone because the institution of slavery had been so integrated into the very fabric of the nation that even today we see traces of it within our society. And so when we take this gospel reading as parable, what we see is Jesus in a very visible way, confronting the type of challenges that every one of us at some point in our life encounter. A storm that feels like it is keeping us from getting where we need to go. Jesus needed to get across the Sea of Galilee in order to continue his ministry, to fulfill the will of God. And I think that we, as people of faith in the world today, are also called to fulfill the will of God and to bring love within the world. But there are things that are getting in our way. As we struggle with the rise of Christian nationalism in the world today, as we struggle with the type of divisions that we see within our community over social issues, such as including LGBTQ plus and transgender people into our community and affirming them, especially during Pride Month, I think that we need to realize that there are storms, both in the world around us and within our own hearts and minds, that we need to struggle to overcome. And we may not understand how we're going to get around those storms. But just because we do not have understanding doesn't mean that we shouldn't be bold and try to do something about it. Just because we don't know what to do doesn't mean that something we do might be effective in helping to bring about change. And this is what Jesus is trying to do for his disciples when he tells them, "Do you not yet have faith?" He's trying to show them that we do not need to have a clear path forward in order to take risks for God. Sometimes just believing that what we are doing is correct, sometimes just being willing to take a risk to try to bring love into the world is enough. We do not know where that journey will take us, but very often that journey makes us stronger. Sometimes we take leaps of faith and we find out that we're wrong. But then we know not to repeat the same mistakes that we made before. And sometimes we make leaps of faith and it doesn't seem like it gets anywhere, but at least we tried. Sometimes we take leaps of faith and we end up paying a price for it. And sometimes we are successful in bringing about change. I and my other clergy colleagues were very happy this last week to see that the governor's veto on a bill that we had invested a lot of our advocacy on to bring a overdose prevention center into the Burlington area had been overruled by the State House. And so this provides an opportunity for people who are struggling with opioid addiction to have a safe place where they can go to basically struggle with that addiction in a way that's not going to get them killed. I think that it took a long time and a lot of advocacy and a lot of struggle for people to realize here in Vermont that this is something worth doing. It took a lot of people being willing to change their minds and to step up and say, hey, I'm willing to take a risk to bring this to our Vermont community. But, people did. People took that leap of faith. And as a result, we have systemic change in our community here in Vermont. Doesn't mean that the problem's solved, but it is a milestone. Like Juneteenth was a milestone. And we're probably going to continue to struggle with addiction here in Vermont. But as long as we believe that we can bring about change if we keep trying, as long as we keep that hope alive in our hearts and have faith in both those who are working with us and those who guide us, like Jesus Christ, for us in the Christian community, that helps us to persevere. When very often the storms around us seem to be too much to overcome. And so I pray that you find faith when you hit a storm. Because sometimes those storms don't just get cleared away like a Jedi mind trick. Sometimes we have to ride them out. And faith is one of those useful tools that can help us get through those choppy moments in our lives. Peace.